The Bible. It's a collection of ancient texts, prophecies, poetry, history, and letters. It holds stories of kings, shepherds, wars, and miracles. But for many, the Bible remains an unopened mystery. Here at The Bible Explained, we're not just reading verses, we're exploring the cultural bedrock and the dramatic narrative woven through its 66 books. Hit that subscribe button and let the journey begin.
Welcome to The Deep Dive, the place where we take stacks of complicated historical and theological material and, well, we turn it into compelling knowledge for you.
And today, we're really getting into the details.
We really are. We are not talking about some generalized future telling, like a new dynasty will rise. We're talking about precision. We are deep diving into predictive prophecy that is so specific, it almost feels like a divine blueprint.
It's that specificity that really arrests your attention. I mean, scholars have reportedly identified over 190 prophecies about the anticipated Jewish Messiah, the Messiah, the Anointed One.
190, wow.
And what we're focusing on today are the reported 44 of those that were fulfilled in the first advent of Jesus Christ. And that list includes things like, the town of his birth, the exact vehicle for a specific parade, and even the precise amount of money paid for his betrayal.
That level of detail is just staggering. And it makes our mission today very, very clear. We're going to unpack this blueprint. We need to examine how those two main prophetic expectations, the suffering servant from Isaiah and the reigning king from the Psalms, how they converged in one person.
And also the methodology. Yeah. You have to look at how the New Testament authors connected those ancient sources to the life of Christ.
Because that connection is the key, right? It wasn't always a simple one-to-one prediction and fulfillment.
Not at all. The authors of the New Testament, they were employing a really sophisticated method of interpretation. Their goal was to reveal Jesus as the culmination of the entire Hebrew story. So we really need to establish that framework first.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this methodology because this is where the deep learning really happens for the listener. What are the major categories?
Well, we can break them down into about 4 primary methods the early church used to understand fulfillment. The first one is the most straightforward, literal or direct fulfillment. This is basically a prediction that's realized exactly as it was foretold. The event, the location, the circumstance, it's precisely named. For example, Micah 5.2 predicts the Messiah's birth location in Bethlehem. That's it. That's a literal fulfillment.
Clean, clear, simple correspondence. Yeah. So what comes next when the connection isn't so direct?
The second is typological fulfillment, and this is absolutely crucial for understanding the whole Old Testament. The OT describes historical patterns, things that happen to Israel or its leaders that serve as a type, or you could call it a template.
A template.
And Christ is the antitype. He embodies and perfects that historical pattern. So the claim is that Jesus is the ultimate realization of the story God started with the nation of Israel.
So an earlier historical then isn't just history. It's actually a prophetic template that Christ then fulfills perfectly down the line.
Precisely. And third is what we call composite or telescope fulfillment. This is where the New Testament authors combine details from several different prophets or OT texts into one fulfillment quote for a single New Testament event. And sometimes they might attribute that resulting quote to only the most prominent or well-known source in that cluster, even if other prophets contributed some of the details.
Now, that raises a really important question. If they're blending quotes from, say, Jeremiah and Zechariah, but they only attribute it to Jeremiah, doesn't that seem a little questionable by modern citation standards? How do we understand their frame of reference?
That's a great question, and it really speaks to their theological priorities. They weren't writing an academic paper with footnotes,
Right.
They were trying to demonstrate the essential unity of the entire prophetic tradition. By blending sources, they're showing that God's plan was seamless across centuries and different spokesmen. They prioritized the message of the collected prophets over our modern need for, source isolation.
Okay, that clarifies the difference in perspective. That makes sense. What's the final category?
That would be anticipatory fulfillment, which is sometimes called by the Latin term sensus plenior, or the fuller sense.
Fuller sense.
Yeah. This acknowledges that a prophecy, while it was probably relevant to the prophet's immediate historical context, also possessed a deeper meaning that would only find its complete realization in the Messiah. The apostles argued that, well, if King David wrote a prophecy about his body not decaying, but David himself died and decayed,
then it couldn't be about him.
Right. The prophecy must be pointing forward to a greater future descendant.
That sets the table perfectly for understanding the complexity of this whole blueprint. So let's look at the early events. Let's start with the original hype man, the forerunner.
Absolutely. The expectation for the Messiah was always paired with the arrival of a divine messenger to, prepare the way. Malachi 3.1 says, "I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me." And then Isaiah 40.3 describes the voice of one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord."
And John the Baptist steps directly into that role. I mean, the wilderness, the message of repentance. The gospel writers were crystal clear that his ministry, both the message and the location, was the fulfillment of those predictions.
And Jesus himself left no ambiguity about it. He explicitly identified John as Elias, which was for to come, fulfilling that Malachi prophecy about Elijah preceding the great day of the Lord. John was, in a sense, the final prophetic bridge between the two testaments.
So moving on from the herald, let's tackle the complexity of typology right away with the flight to Egypt. After Herod's brutal massacre of the male children in Bethlehem.
Which itself fulfilled the prophecy from Jeremiah about Rachel weeping for her children.
Right. So after that, Jesus' family fled, and then they returned.
And when they returned, Matthew quotes Hosea 11.1, "Out of Egypt I called my son."
No, wait a minute. Hosea 11.1 is clearly talking about the Exodus. God called the nation of Israel out of slavery. It's an historical reference to the corporate body, not a prediction about an individual. So why would Matthew use it?
This is the genius of typological fulfillment. Historically, God called the nation Israel his son. But Israel failed to be the perfectly obedient son, constantly turning back to idols and so on. Matthew is arguing that Jesus, the ultimate perfect Son of God, had to retrace the entire historical path of the nation, starting with the Exodus, and do it perfectly.
So Jesus' short trip to Egypt wasn't just a geographical necessity to escape Herod. It was a theological statement. He was, in a way, corrupting and perfecting the journey that the nation of Israel had failed to complete.
Exactly. His life became the ultimate encapsulation of Israel's entire story, a living, faithful remnant confirming the continuity of God's plan while also asserting his own superiority. It's a real aha moment when you realize the sheer breadth of that narrative connection.
Speaking of narrative, let's pivot to his ministry and public presentation. Even the Messiah's teaching style was apparently part of this divine blueprint.
Oh, it was mandated centuries earlier. Psalm 78.2, written by Asaph, states, "I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden for the beginning." This defines the precise didactic style of the Anointed One.
And the Gospels make it so clear that Jesus consciously adopted this style. They even say he spoke to the crowds only in parables specifically to fulfill this prophecy.
And this teaching method, it served that dual purpose we see throughout the Old Testament. It was revelatory for the disciples, those who were open to the truth. But it acted as a kind of judicial veil for the hard-hearted, echoing Isaiah.
It's fascinating.
The parables gave the disciples the keys to the kingdom while shielding the meaning from those who were actively rejecting the message.
And what's so interesting is how anchored those abstract concepts were in their real world. When we talk about seeds and sowers, archaeological finds in Galilee, like the mosaic floors of ancient synagogues, they show all these agrarian motifs that confirm how perfectly those stories fit into the everyday culture. It roots the prophecy in a verifiable reality.
That tension between, power and humility, it all culminated in his ultimate public statement, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem.
An event mandated in Zechariah 9.9, lowly and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt the foal of an ass.
Think about the moment. The crowds are expecting a conquering hero, a military liberator, someone to overthrow the Roman occupation. The typical conquering king enters on a war horse. This event was absolutely deliberate.
And Jesus just subverts that expectation completely by riding a donkey. What was the significance of the donkey in that context?
The donkey was the mount of peace. When judges or kings entered cities in a time of peace, they rode a donkey. Jesus was making a statement that he was indeed the prophesied king of Israel, but his immediate mission was not military conquest. It was a humble, peaceful, almost nonviolent entry.
So even the choice of transport demonstrated the lowly aspect of the king's first advent.
Exactly. The gospel writers highlighted it. But the crowds, even after this demonstration of peace, they ultimately rejected him. And that rejection itself was foretold.
Absolutely. John 1.11 just summarizes it. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. This was prophetically required. He was the stone the builders rejected from Psalm 118, and the despised and rejected by men, servant of Isaiah 53.
And this rejection brings us directly into the final, most detailed part of the blueprint, the passion narrative. This is where the level of specificity becomes just astounding. Let's start with Judas's treachery.
Okay.
The betrayal was quantified down to the silver coin. Zechariah 11.1-13 describes the shepherd being valued at and paid 30 pieces of silver.
Which, as we know, was the exact monetary value of a slave injured by an ox, according to the law in Exodus. So the betrayal price wasn't just random. It carried this deep symbolic weight, the price of a life considered property.
It's incredible precision. And what happens to the money afterwards confirms the prophetic link. Judas throws the money back into the temple. The priests can't put blood money into the general fund, so they buy the potter's field with it, a burial place for strangers.
And here is where we revisit that concept of composite fulfillment, because the Gospel of Matthew explicitly attributes this transaction to the prophet Jeremiah.
Correct. Matthew 27 combines the specific amount, 30 pieces, from Zechariah, with the subsequent action of buying the potter's field, which Jeremiah had also referenced. Matthew blended these elements, and he attributed the composite event to Jeremiah, likely due to his status as a major prophet who also dealt with symbolism of fields and purchases.
It's a stunning example of how they read their sacred texts as a single coherent narrative.
It really is.
Let's move to the ultimate act of suffering, detailed so vividly in Isaiah 53. The prophet described the penal substitutionary nature of the Messiah's death, that he would bear the sin of many. How did the trial itself confirm this?
The conduct during the trial confirms it immediately. Isaiah 53.7 describes the servant as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth.
And Jesus remained totally silent before Pilate and the chief priests, just refused to engage with the torrent of accusations. He was a silent victim.
Then came the execution itself. The prophecy stated he would be numbered with the transgressors.
Fulfilled by being crucified between two criminals.
Exactly. And even in the midst of that torment, the final detail of Isaiah 53.12, that the servant made intercession for the transgressors, was fulfilled by Jesus' prayer from the cross. Father, forgive them.
This blueprint even extended to his burial, which was required to be, well, paradoxical, wasn't it?
It was a contradiction that could only be resolved by human contingency. Isaiah 53.9 required him to be assigned a graze with the wicked and with the rich in his death.
So if he was crucified with criminals, the default expectation would be a mass, inexpensive grave burial with the wicked.
Right. But then Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy, prominent man who was also a secret disciple, he intervened. He claimed the body and provided an honorable burial in his own new, expensive tomb. So the historical events, driven by external forces, perfectly satisfied both of those seemingly contradictory requirements.
Intended for the wicked, but rescued by the rich. That detail alone just speaks volumes about the level of control required for this plan to unfold.
It does.
Okay, now let's discuss one of the most technical and I think fascinating fulfillments. The physical act of piercing.
This is where we see textual criticism and archaeology directly affirming the fulfillment. We have Psalm 22.16, a song deeply associated with the crucifixion, which says, "They have pierced my hands and my feet." And then Zechariah 12.10 states, "They will look on me, the one they have pierced."
The nails in the spear confirm the New Testament fulfillment, but tell us about the centuries-long textual controversy around Psalm 22.16.
Well, for a very long time, the standard Hebrew text that many scholars use, the Masoretic text, it contained a tricky phrase in that verse that translates to something like a lion are my hands and feet, which is, hard to interpret physically.
Right.
However, the Greek Septuagint, which was a translation used by Hellenistic Jews centuries before Christ, explicitly rendered it as pierced.
So ancient scholars already suspected the original Hebrew must have read pierced, but they lacked direct evidence.
Exactly. They suspected the text had changed by only a single letter over time. But then came the stunning archaeological evidence. The discovery of the Nail-over Dead Sea Scroll, dated around the 1st century, provided an ancient Hebrew manuscript containing the word rak, which translates directly as "they have dug" or "pierced."
That is the ultimate verification. A physical scroll discovered in the desert confirms the original reading of the ancient prophecy, which in turn confirms the precise physical fulfillment on the cross. You just can't ask for a better linkage.
It provides overwhelming proof that the most explicit description of crucifixion was indeed present in ancient Hebrew texts.
Finally, the ultimate prophetic necessity, triumph over decay, even resurrection was anticipated.
It was absolutely required to validate the mission and to usher in the new covenant. Psalm 16.10 declares, "Nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption."
And this is a textbook case of that anticipatory fulfillment we talked about.
Precisely. As the apostles argued, King David, the author, saw corruption. He was buried. His body decayed. Therefore, the prophecy must logically point to a greater fulfillment, a greater descendant, the Messiah, whose body would be incorruptible. The resurrection validates the entire prophetic scheme.
And this entire sequence of events established that seismic shift in history, the New Covenant.
Yes. Jeremiah 31 promises that God would initiate a new covenant, one based on radical forgiveness of sin, and one where the law would be internalized, written on the hearts of the people, not just on stone tablets. And Jesus brought this to fruition.
He instituted the Lord's Supper during that final Passover feast, declaring the cup represented the blood of the covenant. His sacrifice established the means of forgiveness and internal obedience, superseding the old system.
The sheer volume and the minute specificity we've explored, from the price of betrayal, the humble arrival, the textual nuances of ancient scrolls, the paradoxical burial, it really demonstrates a comprehensive and intricate design unfolding over centuries.
And for you, the learner, knowing these hermeneutical methods, typology, composite citation, anticipatory fulfillment, it allows you to read the ancient texts not just as scattered historical documents, but as pieces of a single, coherent, overarching narrative that was intentionally pointing toward the Messiah.
The prophetic word is trustworthy because its details, even the most technical and improbable ones, were fulfilled intentionally and precisely.
So here is the final provocative thought for you to carry forward. The New Testament writers knew Psalm 22 inside and out. They quoted it repeatedly during the crucifixion narrative, the cry of being forsaken, the soldiers casting lots for garments. Yet they never directly quoted the most explicit prophecy of the crucifixion. Psalm 22.16, which, as we discussed, reads, "Pierced my hands and my feet," even though the fulfillment was demonstrably obvious to eyewitnesses, and the oldest Hebrew text confirms that reading. Why? Why might this most explicit detail have been intentionally left for later readers and textual scholars, like those who found the Dead Sea Scrolls, to uncover and confirm centuries later? Think about the timing of Revelation and who the intended audience of those textual confirmations might have been.
The Bible isn't just a history book. It's a living, challenging text. As you reflect on what we covered today regarding this topic, consider how this new context changes your reading of the verses. If you appreciated this breakdown, sharing it with just one friend who struggles with understanding the Bible is the best way you can support the channel. Subscribe for more, click here for your next explanation, and never stop seeking clarity. Until next time.